Kind of a sleepy week here in the legislature, the first week of the second half of the session. We will hit on some topics, both local and national, with our WRTV political insiders, conservative commentator Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, Democratic insider Brian Gaddie joining us as always. Good to have you, gentlemen. Let's get right into it. Let's talk legislature first, specifically the Speaker of the House, Todd Huston. This week, he resigned his VP position at the College Board that he had held for 9 years. He, again, a pretty high executive at the College Board, which of course develops the SAT. They develop advanced placement courses that most high schools offer and a lot of colleges look at when it comes to admissions. And it all goes back to House Bill 1134 and the Speaker's support of it. But Abdul, we'll start with you. I'm kind of surprised that Speaker Huston's relationship with the College Board and that position has not come up before now, considering all the education bills, obviously, that the legislature's had to cover.
Well, first of all, always good to be here with you today, Ray. By the way, also, you can mention I'm a credentialed journalist, too, by the state of Indiana, just to put that in there as well. It is and it isn't, because once again, we have a part-time legislature. And with a part-time legislature, folks have jobs outside the Indiana General Assembly. Now, we could take the Speaker's case, the job with the College Board, and say, okay, well, should we make Indiana's lawmakers full-time so wait, no one has to do any sort of outside work? But we spoke with the Speaker on Thursday, sort of the media gaggle that he does sort of at the end of the week on session, and he basically said that there's no connection between his job as Speaker per se and his leaving of the College Board, particularly House Bill 1134. Now, what he did say was that he was just kind of tired and just sort of exhausted by being Speaker and by trying to do his job as VP on the College Board. So he just basically decided to let the College Board job go. Now, granted, that's also $500,000 a year, so hopefully the Speaker will be able to find and replace that income. But this is what happens when you have a part-time legislature. Folks have jobs outside of the Indiana General Assembly.
I have a feeling he won't have trouble finding another job, Brian, but at the same time, the timing does seem a little suspicious.
It really does. I mean, he's involved with all these bills involving education, whether it's CRT, obviously teaching, trying to tell teachers what to teach in the classroom. And he can't, to me, it's a conflict of interest. If he's going to be involved in all these bills, how can he also be involved with the company, obviously, that's involved with the SAT? So it really is something that I'm quite frankly shocked that no one's brought it up, brought it as an issue before until now. So I think the media is obviously on it more than it was before. And I can tell you right now, the Indiana Democratic Party, we're a much more robust party now than we've ever been. As I jokingly say, we're no longer the everlast bag for the Republican Party. We're no longer going to just be their punching bag. We're going to start bringing these issues to the forefront and being much more aggressive. So I think that played a big role in it as well.
But Brian, Abdul makes a good point. We have part-time lawmakers. They obviously hold jobs. I mean, arguably, you could say the same about, let's say, a Democratic lawmaker who happens to be a school teacher, or we could talk about the nursing home industry all day long, with so many lawmakers that have had a hand in the nursing home industry and regulating it while they are working for that industry. With a part-time legislature or a part-time governing body of any type, Brian, those conflicts, you can't seem to avoid those.
Well, I guess you could say that, but at the same time, Ray, it is a conflict of interest. And, I'm sure he could find a job doing something else. He doesn't have to necessarily, work where he was working before. And if he's going to be involved in legislation that's involving education, then he should recuse him. To use a legal term, he should recuse himself from those issues. So I stand by what I said. I think it's definitely a conflict of interest. And I'm glad the media.
But by that point, then that means should every lawmaker in every industry recuse themselves from every issue. There are lawmakers that sell insurance. They recuse themselves from voting on insurance legislation. There are a lot of lawmakers who are farmers. They recuse themselves from voting on agricultural legislation. If you said you start going down this road, you're going to find that you have nobody, let's say in a part-time legislative situation, no one can serve, because eventually everybody's going to have to vote on something that involves their industry. And by the way, we won't even start talking about the budget.
Well, even if you're going to have those issues, Abdul, at the very least, you should be upfront and open about it. And I don't think the Speaker was. So that's my opinion as a Democrat.
So do we have a full-time legislature then? And if so, I mean, in Indiana, could you even remotely pay anybody enough a full-time salary as a lawmaker to want to get them out of the private sector?
Well,
I
my
don't know.
thing is this. If you want to
Yeah.
see what a full-time legislator looks like, just drive 75 miles to my home state of Illinois. And I think that question kind of answers itself.
I was going to cite California, but that's okay.
Abdul-Hakim, Shabazz, Brian Gaddie, our political insiders here. Let's move on to a big national issue, and that is the ongoing investigation into the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and all kinds of reaction to it. First, let's talk about this infamous now memo that came out from the Republican National Committee that labeled, directly quoting from the memo, the events of January 6th as legitimate political discourse. Now, Brian, Republicans have come out since then and tried to clarify that they were not talking about anything other, or that they were not specifically talking about the rioters that took over the Capitol or tried to take over the Capitol that day, but that was left out of the actual resolution. And this week, the chairman of the Indiana Republican Party, Kyle Hupfer, who's also the general counsel for the RNC, proudly said that he voted for that resolution. Brian, what do you think?
Well, this reminds me when you're at Walmart and you hear over the speaker, clean up on aisle 6, they're trying to clean up this, and it's just, you can't clean it up. You know what legitimate political discourse is, Abdul and Ray? We're having it right now. My good friend Abdul is a conservative. I'm a liberal. He's a libertarian. I'm a Democrat. This is legitimate political discourse, not insurrectionists. And to be blunt about it, they were behaving like terrorists, fighting police officers. I guess so much for Blue Lives Matter, right? This was not legitimate political discourse. And the Republican National Committee, or is it the Republican National Cult, or maybe the Republican National Circus? They've got to decide what they are. And the fact is, that was not legitimate political discourse. The Republicans should be ashamed of themselves. And it just, there is no excuse for what was said, no doubt about it. And we Democrats are going to make them own those words. We're going to use it in campaigns, not just here in Indiana, but all over the country.
Abdul, you're a lawyer. Mr. Hupfer's a lawyer. Why not just put the lines in the resolution and make all this easy to understand instead of having to clean up after the fact?
Well, I think as an attorney, you got to balance out the interests of your clients. And if your clients say, "Hey, we want X, Y, Z said," then technically you really don't have a choice unless they're asking you to do something unethical. What I think this really does show at the end of the day is just how complicated. Well, not really complicated, because I think that, frankly, the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th weren't just insurgents. I argue they were treasonous and should have been charged as much, because they're basically trying to overthrow the legitimate government of the United States of America, particularly when folks talk about hanging, the vice president, telling the vice president to stop. But what I do think January 6th has done is put Republicans in a very precarious position of having to balance what their base thinks versus what the rest of the national country thinks. And I put that solely at the feet of Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. and Rudy Giuliani and the rest of those guys.
Senator Young was among those, Senator Todd Young from here in Indiana was among those who condemned the resolution. And there were some members of the RNC from Indiana who did vote against it. One notably said that it was, not, they needed more Republicans than fewer right now, especially going into midterm elections. But Senator Young was critical of the resolution, although it was kind of a mild criticism. Abdul, how much water does this carry for the rest of the year into the midterms, do you think, given that it happened so early in the year and we've still got quite a bit of time before the elections run around?
I think, like I said, I think it occupies a news cycle for about a week or so, but then we'll move on to the next big shiny political object. But at the end of the day, most folks are going to go to the polls, and I argue in November, to deal with the issues of inflation and price just going up through the roof. That's going to be what most Hoosiers are going to vote on, and frankly, I think most Americans are going to vote on in this midterm. Yes, there'll be some people on the left and the right who will basically vote on the issue of the insurgency, but most folks are going to go to bread, butter, pocketbook issues, particularly the issues of inflation.
Brian, what does it say if Democrats are not able to make this an effective issue in the midterms, an attempt to overthrow the government, as Abdul said, being outweighed by how much a steak costs at the grocery store?
I would say we can make this an effective issue, and I'll tell you why. Because it goes back to, why would you entrust the Republicans to the keys of government again when they had government the last time, and we saw how they behaved on January 6th? The big lie still being propagated by Donald Trump. The Republicans, reminds me of that song with Boys to Men, On Bended Knee. All the Republicans are all on bended knee. They have to go along with the golden one, or else they're ostracized from the party. And we should not allow the Republicans to to have the keys of government again. Sure, is inflation an issue? Of course, but is your democracy an issue? That's an even more important issue. I would rather deal with inflation. Again, I'm not trying to act like it's not an issue. It is. Of course, inflation is an issue. But, having a small d democratic government is even a bigger issue than the price of a steak.
I'm glad our Boys to Men reference there, Brian, was on bended knee and not "I'll Make Love to You," because that's my favorite Boys to Men song, but kind of inappropriate for this conversation here. Now, that's a very bad segue to Mike Pence, but it's what I got today. Vice President Mike Pence, speaking of the insurrection, this past week gave a speech to a Federalist Society group in Florida in which he proclaimed that Donald Trump was wrong and that he, as the vice president, or when he was the VP, had no power to overturn the election. It's made ripples nationwide. A lot of people thinking this sets up almost a Pence versus Trump thing for the 2024 primary. We're not that far along yet, Abdul, but how surprising was it that Mike Pence did come out finally after over a year, Abdul, and say that publicly?
Well, I would think the vice president probably got tired of being Donald Trump's punching bag. I'll be brutally honest with you, and just waited to be in the right form to say what he had to say. And also, please note, I found out that the former vice president, Mike Pence, had a very long and extensive conversation with another former Hoosier vice president, Dan Quayle, to find out what Dan Quayle thought. Because remember, Dan Quayle was George Herbert Walker Bush's vice president when they lost back in 1992. And the vice president was the president of the Senate when they had to go through the motions in 93. And what Quayle told Pence was like, look, you don't have the authority to overturn an election. Your jobs are basically ministerial in nature. And so you have to do your job. This was like, a couple hours long conversation. So the vice president was actually following the law, and actually kind of nice to see him sort of not be Donald Trump's floor mat anymore. Say, hey, look, you know what? I did my job, period.
And while that's true, Brian, it did take him quite a while to finally say that.
It did, but he really had a really strong, robust response. He said that he was wrong, and he said that just one person deciding who should be president of the United States is un-American. When I heard that, I was like, wow, that was pretty strong coming from former Vice President Pence. And I'm glad he really decided to stop being Donald Trump's doormat and stand up for himself, because Donald Trump doesn't respect anyone that, kisses his feet, that just does not to kowtow to him all the time. Actually, you could kowtow to him all the time. He still disrespect you. So really, with Donald Trump, it's just like the weather. You never know what's going to happen with him. But one thing we do know for sure, he will always put himself first and the country second.
It could be argued, Abdul, that Mr. Pence, the former Indiana governor, he tried really, really hard not to be that blunt all this time. He would simply say that, he didn't have the authority, but he had nothing but effusive praise for the former president and his time in office, his administration, in the year up until this speech. What do you think finally changed? And why now?
Well, since we're using song references, I would use a Twisted Sister song, "We're Not Going to Take It Anymore." And he probably got tired of just being the perpetual political punching bag for Donald Trump. And I think it's also interesting he made the speech in front of the Federalist Society, which is a group of basically conservative attorneys. And so by doing that in front of conservative attorneys, he was speaking technically to his base, which respects the rule of law. And the Constitution is pretty clear that the vice president does not have the authority to overturn an election. One person can't do it. If Donald Trump has an issue with the election, you can always run again, which he's probably going to do anyway.
And now that that's been established, or likely established, that Donald Trump will run again, we all know that Mr. Pence has long had aspirations for the White House. Brian, what do you think we're looking at for 2024? Looking through the long, it's still 2 years out, but looking way ahead, Pence versus Trump, is that going to be a thing?
It could be Pence versus Trump. It could be Trump versus DeSantis. It's just going to be a mess over there. It's just going to be, really, if Trump wants the nomination, let's just be blunt about it. If Trump really wants the nomination, it's his. The party has really been the need to Trump. It's not the Republican Party anymore. It's the Trump Party. And conservatism these days, is it really about principles, or is it about fidelity to one man? And it's just really sad what's happened to the Republican Party. It really is. Abraham Lincoln, TR, Ike, Reagan, wow, Trump. a really steep descent. That's all I can say.
Well, is it a little too early to say that, Abdul, that it's the Trump party and not the Republican Party? And how long will it be till we truly find out whether a Mike Pence or a Ron DeSantis or anybody else has a shot? Because I would argue right now that if you took a poll in Indiana, Donald Trump would probably be a little more popular than Mike Pence among Republicans.
I think it is right now for the base of the Republican Party. It's the Donald Trump party. It's that simple. However, the base alone doesn't get you to win a presidential election. It can get you in a primary, sure, but it doesn't win you a general election. And I got to remind people that Donald Trump lost 2 presidential elections with a popular vote. And so he lost to Hillary Clinton the popular vote and he lost to Joe Biden the popular vote. And so just kind of keep that in mind as folks go forward. Do you really want somebody who basically lost every time he ran? Now, granted, he won the Electoral College, which is how we do things in this country. But at the same time, he lost before, and he'll probably lose again. And it won't be Democrats that'll make him lose. It'll be moderate suburban Republicans. If this economy if the Biden people get the inflation stuff under control, then I think it's their election to win come 2024. But I do not see Donald Trump winning again in 2024 because if you're a Republican and you voted against Donald Trump in 2020, why would you vote for him again in 2024?
That's
Then,
kind of a
Raymond,
bold.
if I could add that he also in 2018 he lost control of the House of Representatives. 2020 he lost 2 Senate seats in Georgia. So Donald Trump is probably, you could arguably say he's the biggest loser in American politics. So as a Democrat, to quote George W. Bush, bring it on. We love to run against him again. We like to beat him some more. So he seems like he didn't learn his lesson. So we can beat him some more if he wants.
Now that I've done what I typically hate to do, and that's talk about a presidential election 2 years out, we will close the segment there. Our WRTV political insiders, Brian Gaddie, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. Gentlemen, as always, appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for letting this credentialed journalist be a part of the program today. We do appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for showing those credentials up front.